group, typically I'd ask for people to go ahead and post questions in chat as they come up. But since we do have a small group, feel free to just unmute yourself, turn on your video if you do have questions, and we'll be able to see, and we will allow you to ask questions as we go. So we have a bunch of prepared questions today. We have 3 invited panelists: Jim Howe, Jin Wu, and then Beth Dickey. Beth Dickey has not come on yet, but we're hoping she will at some point here. We have some prepared questions that we can ask the panelists just about their general careers in academia. And we will start off by them kind of explaining where they are in their career, kind of what they study, just a little bit about yourself. And then I'll go ahead and ask prepared questions, and feel free to ask questions that you have as we go along as well. So Jim, you are, oh, there's Beth. You are left on my, the first one on my screen, so I'll let you go ahead. Hey Beth, how are you doing?
I really apologize for being late, sorry.
No problem at all. So I was just explaining the way we'll kind of run this is, I have prepared questions, but I'll have you guys introduce yourself first, and then I can go ahead and start going through the prepared questions. And I invited anybody who's attending to just unmute themselves and turn on their video if they have questions as we go along as well, just so there can be kind of a free, open discussion about your all's careers.
Okay.
All right, Jim, take it away.
All right, so you want me to say a little bit about myself and how I got here?
Yeah, how'd you get to where you are, and kind of what has your career looked like? And then I think you've had some aspects kind of in academia as well as out of academia. I know you have a few other responsibilities that are important within your current career, so through like the facilities and everything. So let us know about you.
Okay, well, I'm getting ready to retire. I taught my last class, which was electron microscopy. I can't think of a better class to teach to go out. So, you know, I love electrons. I truly believe electrons rule the world, and it's great to look at the world with electrons. So, you know, it's a great microscopy. Electron microscopy is a great technique, and it's so valuable in material science. So in my career, I've been in academia ever since I got my PhD. I did a short stint, a couple years in industry before I went back to graduate school. And that's what convinced me to go to graduate school, because I was out working at Kaiser Aluminum. And at Berkeley, they were coming up with the first atomic resolution microscope. And I became convinced that if I was ever going to figure out materials, I had to be able to see the atoms. So I left the industry and went back to graduate school. And I've been looking at atoms ever since. Originally, I was in phase transformations and interfaces, and I still do phase transformations and interfaces. I've stuck with that. Early on, my forte was to doing in situ high resolution TEM. And then, you know, as I guess we got one of the first gifts, and so I started getting more interested in eels and spectroscopy, and did some of the very first, I'll never forget with George Weatherly, did some of the first in situ electron spectroscopic imaging, so heating stuff in the microscope and watching the composition change at interfaces and so forth as things grew. And then from that, you know, I got into plasmons, and then the microscopes just kept getting better and better. And now you can see, you know, phonons, and there's just nothing you can't do with an electron microscope. So that's sort of, you know, then I just evolved into those areas over the last, you know, I don't know, 15 or so years. And now, yeah, I'm ready to turn it over to Eric and other young capable. So there you go. I should mention that during that time, and I can comment on this or talk more about this, but during that time, so, you know, being a a microscopist, it's both a curse and a blessing in academia, and I can explain why I say that. But also during that time, I probably was head of, when I started at Carnegie Mellon, took over head of the microscope facility there, and I've pretty much done it my entire time at UVA. So not only have I been a material scientist using electron microscopy as my tool of choice, but I've also been running the facility, a microscope facility for I don't know, 35 years or something more. So I got a lot of experience with that, and it's a different ballgame too. So that's part of being a microscopist in academia. All right, that's probably good enough. I said.
Yeah, it'll hopefully spark a lot of questions. I'll move to the next person on my windows, Jin Woo. You want to let us know about?
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me as a panel here. I am the youngest member of the panel. I got my PhD in 2011. Yeah, so I got it from University of Wisconsin. Before that, I did my master's at UPenn. So I moved school to do my PhD. And before that, I came originally from South Korea. So I got my undergrad in South Korea, and then came to US. So it was my PhD advisor who was the expert, one of the experts in the TM field, especially in the field of studying amorphous materials using fluctuation microscopy. And that's what I did for my PhD. So I got PhD in 2011, and then I moved to UC Santa Barbara. And then I did my postdoc there under Suzanne Stemmer for 3 years. And then I left there in 2014 to join the Ohio State University in the same year. So since then, I've been here. I'm now an associate professor, doing my own research here and having about 7 students. Yeah, I think that's it. Rather short, but yeah.
No, that's great. So
Yeah,
we did pick kind of like a variety of people within their career range right now. So
sure.
It'll be nice to have your perspective as kind of a rising professor as well. All right, Beth, how about you? And congratulations, as always, right? As you are moving.
Good to see you, Eric, and
Good to see you.
Aubrey, Jim. So I started my undergraduate career actually is when I first got introduced to microscopy, and I went to the University of Kentucky. And Jim, I believe we have some sort of overlap there, right?
We do. Yeah.
What's your history at that university?
My history at the UK?
Yeah.
Well, I got my undergraduate degree there in 1974. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So,
yep. That's what I thought, but I wasn't. Yeah. So we had the same alma mater for our undergraduate degree. And that's where I first became a microscopy junkie, because I started doing SEM as an undergrad. And that's where I get hooked. So when I went to grad school, I went to Northwestern under Vinayak Dravid and did my PhD there. One of I think his second batch of students, because he was a fresh assistant professor back then. I also spent time at Oak Ridge National Lab as a graduate student the last about year and a half. I was down at Oak Ridge doing some x-ray work, and I also was Penny Cook was there at that time, so spent time in his group doing STEM. And then when I graduated, I went back to the University of Kentucky and was there for 4 years as an assistant professor and helped them really establish their EM facility. So I was the first official director of their microscopy lab. And then I was there after 4 years. I went to Penn State, where I rose up through the rank of full professor. And about the last 4 or 5 years I was there, I also had an administrative position as associate director of the Materials Research Institute. And part of that job was directing their characterization facility. So it's not uncommon. It's not a criterion, but it's not uncommon for academic faculty to also have a significant role in the facilities at universities. Then I spent 10 years at NC State University. And that's where I met Eric, who was an undergrad. and it's all a small world.
It is.
Very small world. And Aubrey is a PhD student. And it looks like we have Tim on the call. And there we, I think, made some pretty big transformations in their microscopy facility as well. Jim LeBeau and I were both, we were neighbors. Our offices were next to each other. And Jim is now at MIT with Aubrey. And then this year in January, I moved to Carnegie Mellon, another one of Jim's stomping grounds in the topic of small world. And I'm department head of material science now here, and still doing microscopy. So got a good group of people. I tried to hire Eric as a postdoc, but Jim, you wouldn't let him go.
Nope.
I tried my best to keep him at least a little bit longer. So, but you know, it's still possible and down the road. So
it is. It always is. His grasp is tight, but it's loosening.
He's probably ready for a faculty position. So
I am, and we can always keep talking about that. Yeah. So, but yeah, it sounds like Beth and Jim, you're. Go ahead and say that again, Jim. You're breaking up.
I said, one of the things I'm teaching you is how to rise up those ranks really quickly. So like next one, you'll make big bucks and be famous.
There you go. That's what everybody wants, right? Fame and fortune. I just want to research. There. Do good science. But yeah, it sounds like Beth and Jim, you guys have been chasing each other in circles for a good bit of time now. But all right. Well, it's very impressive, very broad aspects of kind of the different places in academia. Personally, I kind of consider, places like national labs, they're definitely part of intertwined with academia. So it's great that we have some perspectives there. Also, some industry perspective, kind of why to choose an academic position over an industry one. I mean, they're very different. So I'd like to first start off by inviting, and also another thing that people don't consider often, Jinwoo has spent time as an academic technically in other countries as well. And it's, from what I understand, I obviously don't have the perspective myself, but that can be a very different thing in some places, different than others. Like I've heard Europe's a very different place to conduct research as a professor. But I'd like to first start off, after hearing everybody's brief introduction. Does anybody in the audience have questions? Feel free to just unmute yourself if you do. If not, then I'll carry on to some prepared questions that I have. Oh. All right, well, so I'll start off with kind of just some general thoughts that I have before the prepared questions then. Jim, so you did spend some time in industry before you came to start looking at microscopy. And you kind of made a comment that you felt like you had to do that in order to understand materials. But was anything about like the structure of industry versus academia kind of draw you in as well, or was it just you wanted to research?
No, there was, sure. So one is, in my early years in industry, I learned, I loved research. I just wanted to dig deep and answer questions. And so it was both learning, finding my love of research, but also in industry too. I learned, I had a great position there, and that's how I got introduced to electron microscopes. I was I was in the metallography section. So I learned metallography at a very high level, but part of that then was getting a new SEM. And so, I got an SEM and got into electron microscopy and so forth. But the thing I quickly learned, even in industry, I was in the research facility, and all the people that were doing the stuff that I wanted to do, which was the really good alloy development and metallurgy and so forth, they all had PhDs. And so it became clear to me that, I needed to go back to school and get a PhD to be in that research world. And so that was a big driver for me to go back to school.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's to be able to keep doing research, right? At a high level.
Yeah.
That's exciting. Okay.
And you know, and back then it was a real research lab. I think doing real research in industry is very difficult these days. They still did some really good research back then.
Yeah, definitely. All right. Any questions yet? I don't see any in the chat. All right, Jinwoo, how about you as a kind of a, you know, in the start off of your academic career right now? I mean, how are you finding that? And then like if you see kind of like more seasoned professors at this point and their general kind of workload and that kind of thing, like, do you have any perspectives on that for people who are looking to enter academia and aren't established yet?
Yeah, I think so if you go back a little, you know, a few years back, right? So you know the point where you're still a student, right? So let's say you're a third year or fourth year, right? But when I was fourth year student, I've seen a lot of cases where you know, the student didn't know what they're gonna do. I mean, more like what they want to do, right? So that's quite common, in fact, right? So then you know they're like, you know, okay, so I'll see how this flows, and you know, I'll end up wherever, right? And of course, there's a lot of factors. There are a lot of factors, like you know, you have your personal matters, family issues, and many other things that also affects your decision, your career decision, right? Yeah. So I you know, there are many different, like a variety of cases that you know that people go through. But in my case, I think what really helped for me was the fact that I really wanted to become a professor. I basically didn't have any second option, right? So you know, and because I just didn't want to go to industry. That was it, right? So you know, that actually made me you know, think more clearly about what I need to achieve the goal, and then that also helped me prepare for the whole thing earlier in the stage, right? So I think that worked out, right? And then I went to a postdoc group where you know, it has been, you know, historically successful in producing professors, and that worked out to me as well, fortunately. And then the one after me, right? So okay, so the strategical point of view, that worked out as well. Yeah, so that's kind of the path and the kind of mindset that I had, you know, which isn't always the same among people, right? Yeah, so that's something that I wanted to mention. So if you decide your mind, if you make up your mind earlier whether you want to go to industry, national lab, or being a faculty, then that I think is going to help a lot, because you get to prepare, you know, starting at the earlier stage of your education. Yeah.
So just have like a planned path is what you're saying.
Yeah, yeah. Well, obviously you have to have, you know, plan B, right? If this doesn't work out, that you should have plan B, right? But plan A should have much more weight, right? 95% of weight and 5% maybe at plan B. I think that was my kind of like you know, distribution of weight, rather than like 60 versus 40, right? Yeah, yeah. So that's one thing I can tell you before becoming a faculty, right? So you know, and then I became a faculty as I wanted. Then you know, it's a totally different story, right? So then you know, it's a different battle, right? So you get to raise your money, and you get to you know, you need to manage your own group. And I mean, while that's a fun thing to do, that's what I wanted to do. But then you know, at the beginning of the start of your, you know, assistant professor career, it's challenging. It's challenging to everyone, not just me or anyone. And even if you get you get a huge funding in the first year, that doesn't mean that the process is easy for you. There's always difficulty, you know, follows along with it. Responsibility follows along with your funding or anything that you earn, right? So you go through it, and then and it takes time for your group to grow. Right now, I have senior students and postdocs who are working, you know, hard. So they take care of most of the works, the actual research, right? But at the beginning, you have to do it alone, right? Almost by yourself, with maybe one student who doesn't know what he's doing or she's doing. Yeah, so that's the difficulty, and you go through it, and then again, eventually, that you get tenured, and things get settled a little bit, and then your job's a little, you feel a little different, right? So you're more settled, right, in many ways, but then there's more challenges and other kind of responsibility that comes after it, right? So yeah, so that has been kind of like a broad summary of what has been going on with me. Yeah.
No, it's great to know, especially for everybody kind of on the call right now, because most of us haven't entered that point. And I know some of us might be in personally like looking towards that academia path. So having a perspective of like what to expect when you get there, that's a big deal, because I think it's probably a lot more responsibility than anybody realizes, even if you think you do, until you're in that position. You don't know what's going to come your way. So wonderful. But before we get into kind of the questions of responsibilities, because everybody has perspectives on those, and we're kind of at different levels as well. I was wondering, Beth, you have a certain perspective that none of us really have, or in our future mini-series with academia, industry, and national labs. You worked at a national lab and in academia, but they're both very research intensive. And I was just wondering kind of what are the differences that you see, or I guess you were a postdocing at Oak Ridge. What are the differences you see in that versus your academic?
Yeah, I actually didn't postdoc. I was there as a student, and then as a young faculty member too, because when I started at Kentucky, we didn't have the microscopes that I needed. So almost every weekend I would drive down to Oak Ridge and get on the microscope until we got our own. So I know Oak Ridge very well and have continued to interact with them through various mechanisms. But yeah, so I've spent most of my career in academia, have some experience and know some of the labs, especially Oak Ridge, very well. And then I do interact with industry because I run an industry consortium. So, and I end up talking to microscopists in those companies quite a bit. And that can be actually, I think, for people deciding which route they want to go career-wise. That might be the most difficult one to access and understand, is what it's like to do PhD level work at a company when your expertise is microscopy. And I'll just say, I think it can vary pretty wildly depending on the particular company. So I think as you expand your network and start looking for jobs, or even contemplating whether you want to work in certain places, finding people, and probably through the MSA, because many of those people are still members of the society, having a chance to talk to them and see what their day-to-day job is pretty important. A lot of past members of my group work at places like Intel, 3M, and are focused on microscopy. And their day-to-day life can be very different, because the balance of doing R&D support versus product development versus quality control can vary quite a bit. And even within a company, there can be different divisions, and your contribution or in what you do on a day-to-day basis can be pretty different. But there's lots of good microscopists, and that can vary as well, even from, I think, from depending on where you live in the world. I interact with a lot of people in Asia, in Korea, and companies in Korea and Japan in particular. And it's not uncommon to go into a Japanese company and they have aberration corrected TEMs and are doing pretty sophisticated microscopy. So, I mean, that's about all I'll say about industry, because I don't have firsthand information. I ended up going into academia kind of a little bit by chance. I didn't have it like that wasn't exactly what I was going to do. Actually, I was supposed to go postdoc in Max Planck with Manfred Rühle's group, who was in the 80s and 90s and early 2000s, was one of the big microscopy groups in the world, but ended up being asked to apply for this position at Kentucky, and thought, oh, I'll try it. It'd be good, good practice. Then you end up with a position, and decided to take it, which was, so anyway, it wasn't extremely purposeful, but I probably would have ended up there anyway.
It worked out for you.
Yeah, it worked out okay. National labs are interesting too. I think the perspective I have, again, having been there as a visitor quite a bit, being on advisory boards, having students who have gone and worked in national labs, is it can be very productive. And if you really like doing research, I mean, you're working for the government, but we are too in academia, right? Because most of our funding comes from the government. So we have a lot of red tape associated with that. Probably not as much as people at national labs, but you don't have to have as the teaching responsibilities and some of the other things. I'd say you have the opportunity to be much more focused on research in a national lab. Still doing proposal writing and those sorts of things, and you've got those demands. Not as much student involvement or advising. There can be some. If it's something you want to do, you can partner with either your local university. So if you're at Argonne, you're probably going to try to establish relationships with Northwestern and UIUC or places like that, or with some of your collaborators, and you can be opportunistic about that. I do think that some of the national labs do a very good job preparing people for academic positions. So it's seen a lot of people do a postdoc at a national lab and move into an academic position and be quite well prepared for that. I think one thing you have to be a little careful about, and this can be true depending on the research group that you come from. If you're coming from an environment where you have 20 authors on every publication, and you may have a lot of publications, but you have to do a much better job of articulating what your unique contributions and your real expertise are, because that can be more difficult to assess when there's many co-authors on publications. Okay. So then, so those are, I guess, my perspectives on those two career paths. Academia, it's great. I think sometimes academics, we either love what we're doing, right, and we're passionate about it. I think 3 people on this call are, and we just love our jobs. We do work hard, but I think the personality types that go into these positions are people who like to work really hard. So we do it to ourselves to a certain extent, it's just, that's the way we like to, I think that's our MO, is we like to be doing new things and working all the time. And that's, I don't think there's anybody, forcing us to do it. I always felt as I was going, I didn't get real stressed about tenure, because I kind of took the attitude that if I'm doing my job as well as I can and enjoying it and doing the things I want to do, if I'm not meeting some standards, I probably don't need to be there and probably not enjoying myself. So some people get very, bent out of shape and hand wringing about the tenure process, but I think, you do what you enjoy, and if you're a hard worker and, and persistent, that, and you learn, from people around you, that you don't need to, I don't think it needs to be any harder than any other job. I don't think, I think there are people who also have that kind of personality trait and mindset, and they don't go into academia and they work their tails off in industry because that's what they like to do. So it's not unique to academia. But I think we do tend to attract people who are highly motivated individuals.
I agree. You have to want to do it, right? It's not an easy path. So it's,
and you can do it and have a balanced life. And I'm sure we'll get to questions about that later. But.
Yeah. Does anybody have any questions for anybody? I think this is a good place to ask for more. on the comment of balanced life, does anybody have questions about that type of thing? Or
You
what's
know,
acceptable?
I would say,
So I did have a question about life
agree with.
balance. Oh.
Jim, let's go.
So
No, go ahead, ask the question.
thank you. So I was just wondering, for those of you who are managing labs, how do you balance that with your career as far as like a faculty member, and then also the rest of your life? Because I know, like, from my position where I've been managing a lab, a lot of the times I end up having to work late into the evening. Sometimes I have to come in on weekends and those kind of things, and I find that challenging. And now thinking about pursuing a graduate degree, like, I'm just wondering how I'll be able to also balance the research.
Yeah, you know, I can speak to that a little bit. Balancing the lab and being a faculty member at the same time can be tough. And the reason is you have all the same responsibilities as any other faculty member. But if you're running a facility, then there's that whole administrative thing. And if you have staff, it depends on if you're responsible for getting their support, which may fluctuate with your department or your dean, and all kinds of issues. So it's running a lab is a big job, and putting that on top of being a faculty member it's really hard. I'll just say it. It's really hard, and it's only gotten harder with time. Yeah, you want to think twice about how much you do that. I would say.
I might make a comment on that, 'cause I think that faculty who do microscopy and you go to a university, depending on where you are, you might be the only microscopist, right? And you may have people try to put you in these managerial or administrative positions early on in your career. And I did that, but I don't recommend it to anybody. I think if you're going the faculty route, you really need to not have that as an assistant professor. You need to focus on your research. And so as department head, I would never put that on an assistant professor, no matter how capable they are, because their first obligations are for running their own research program and advising their own graduate students and teaching undergraduates and that sort of thing. And it really shouldn't be pushed onto you till you're later in your career. Not that you can't do it, it's just you need to make sure that people aren't going to evaluate your tenure on how well you ran the microscopy facility. They're going to evaluate you on your scientific output and your mentoring of graduate students and teaching. So that's a trap that some people can get into. The other trap, I need to be a little bit careful here, because this is the thing I did. I went to a university that didn't have the microscopes that I needed early on in my career. So I was spending my first years not just writing research grants to run my research programs, but also to get instrumentation. And that takes time away. And that can be difficult. So when you negotiate going any place, and if they don't have the infrastructure you need to be careful and talk to people who have been through this about how to negotiate, so that you're not trying to do them a favor of building up their facilities while you're trying to get your research program off the ground.
That makes a lot of sense.
Just as a little add-on to that. So Beth, because you're at Carnegie Mellon. So when I went to Carnegie Mellon, they had a MRL, the Materials Research Lab, when I first joined. And so when they hired me, they said, through the MRL, we'll get you an electron microscope, which at the time was the 4000 EX high resolution. That's what I wanted. So my first year there, though, they had a site visit, and that's when they decided to cancel the MRL. So I had no microscope, no money. And so, yeah, I had to do exactly what you said, write to NSF and try to get a microscope. And I was successful. But and in the meantime, then I was like you. I was traveling everywhere else, back to Berkeley or up to Case Western, wherever I could, to use a microscope to do research. And so I would definitely say if you can go somewhere that has a nice microscope and somebody that's running it, and you can slide in and have a colleague there that can help you and mentor you through the microscopy side of the world at the same time as becoming a faculty member. That's definitely a better situation. But it's like everything. It's trial by fire. You go where the opportunities present themselves, and things don't always work out the way you plan. It's life, right?
So you mentioned that it's gotten only more challenging for you to continue to balance your work and your life. Is that just like lately due to COVID, or is that as your career has progressed, it's become more challenging?
COVID was a whole nother thing. We have a facility and all of a sudden all these instruments, how are you going to use them when, you can't go in? So we had to put everything online, which was, in the end, it's a great benefit, and it was sort of a driver to do it. But that was just, the whole COVID thing, and then how one had to navigate, the whole procedure with research instrumentation, phase 1, 2, phase 3, and all that. That was just a whole nother thing on top of it. I would say for me, when I started, pretty much a facility, you had an SEM, a TEM, a teaching TEM, then a good TEM, like a research TEM, and then maybe an XRD. And that was a facility. Nowadays in the facility, you've got all that stuff, but you might have more XRDs, you might have, XPSs, you might have FIBs, so characterization facilities, I think, in general, have just grown so much more. And so there's just a lot more responsibility running a materials characterization facility nowadays than there was back then. And of course, then that always means too, you have to staff it because it has to be. So then it becomes really an issue of institutional support and, and where all that's coming from. And so that's just, the world is much bigger and more complex now than it was early on. And it just, those are all just challenges that have to be met. And, bringing in, Beth, you can speak to this too, but, bringing in money for service contracts and, how much to charge users and all those sorts of things it's hard. It's hard to run a facility as it gets really big. It's a lot of work.
Have you had to continue researching now that you're in the role where you're running the facility?
Absolutely. So I'm expected to do the same research as any other faculty member, in terms of bringing in grants and publishing. So I don't know what, again, the other faculty here can speak to that, but sort of at UVA, the algorithm is, your annual review, promotion and tenure, but annual review is sort of 40, 40% on your research and dollars you bring in papers, 40% on your teaching and 20% on service. So even if you run a major facility, the higher ups sort of only count that as 20%. Like service, really, the way it really works in academia, again, others can correct me, it's not 40, 40, 20, it's more like 60, 30, 10, or, but so even if you run a facility that helps hundreds of people, it gets lumped into service and it doesn't count a lot for you. Now, it depends on your chair and your dean. So you're always at the whim of, your chair and dean, and they come and go, and sometimes they're great and sometimes they're absolutely terrible. So it's it's tricky. I don't know. Beth, you've seen those things. You want to comment on that? Or?
Well, I was actually curious as to what Jin Woo's role in the facilities has been in Ohio State. Are you in an advisory capacity, or what has been your role through your tenure?
Right. So I was in the opposite situation where our center was already established, and then there were other microscopists here. So I joined here, and then I didn't have responsibility of managing or writing MRI, the instrument grants. So that was a good thing to me. But now I have developed my own group and then my research program. Now I do feel some responsibility, helping out with management and get grants to upgrade our instruments. So it was a stepwise process, but at the beginning, there was no pressure at all. So that was a pretty good thing for me, and fortunate. I feel fortunate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I might comment, there is a very delicate balance, right? If you're in charge and you get to call the shots and you can choose to do things that are beneficial for your own research and your group. There are some places where you're not in charge and you also don't have a voice. And whoever is running the facilities may not run it in a way that you like, and may not support your group, and that's kind of the other end of the spectrum. So you want to have like the optimal involvement where you have a voice in how things are being run, because your research is going to rely on those facilities to a large extent, but for it not to overburden you. I think the most successful models I've been involved with is where there's, I'd say, a faculty director who is providing maybe scientific leadership for the facility and that sort of thing, but hand in hand with a really good managing director who's not on a tenure track position and whose job responsibilities are to run the facility. And if those two people get along really well, it can work, and they're pulling in the same direction. It can be quite beneficial. And then, often it's not just one person that needs to have a say in how the facility runs. So if there are faculty steering committees and those sorts of things where you can at least serve on those and understand why decisions are being made and how, and have some input on that's important. So I have seen people go into faculty positions where they come in, they're not taxed with the burden of running facility, but they also don't have any say, and it ends up the facility is not effectively supporting their research and it doesn't work and they end up leaving.
Yeah. All right, do we have any other questions? No. Okay, so there was a comment about, we've kind of got into the, the departmental roles that you're required to do, kind of the facility component. But from my understanding, teaching is also, and kind of running a group and advising is a big part of your position. As Jim said, it's expected 40% and somewhere in there. But teaching is a large component. I guess kind of comments from everybody on kind of balancing that. Like, what are your thoughts on the teaching component? I know it's a lot of work, right? But it's also it's fun. Like, it's fun teaching new students something that you're passionate about. I'm kind of wondering your perspectives on that aspect of academia.
Yeah, maybe I can start. I think I totally agree with what Jim mentioned. It's really 60, 30, 10 or something, right? So you really, when you start this, you really want your focus on this, grant writing and, going your research going. So, I mean, I wanted to enjoy teaching, but that was simply not possible. It was just for me, but, I just somehow managed teaching. That was how, I viewed it, right? But then after my research projects are, being matured, and then I get some more time to think about, how I engage more effectively with students and all that, then, I began to enjoy teaching. That was only about 2 years ago. Mm-hmm. Yeah, right. But other panel members here who have more experience would add more to that, I think.
I can comment. Beth, do you want to?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I enjoy teaching. It's in typical loads, as you probably gather from where you are, at least people in our discipline, which we're all material scientists, it tends to be one course a semester. Often we're teaching a lab course if we're teaching the microscopy course, and that can be a bit more work because you're at least coordinating the labs and if not teaching some of them yourselves. I find it enjoyable. I find it really actually a challenge. I'm probably considered a decent teacher or pretty, maybe even above average, but it's not easy. It's a challenge to teach well. And I still try to improve how I teach in terms of transferring information and knowledge to students. And I still feel like I'm refining that, although I'm not teaching, I didn't teach this past semester, which makes me feel a little bit guilty, but with my new role, I didn't teach this semester. So it's a challenge. I feel like you never have enough time, because you could always be doing it better. And you always wish there was more time to contribute to it. But I think have to take the mindset, especially when you're a young faculty, you want to make sure that you're not changing courses every year, that you have some stability so that you can grow a course, and that it is something that evolves. The first time you teach, it's going to be very different from the fifth time you teach it. And you're not going to get it right the first time, but you just make a good conscious effort to keep improving how you teach. Keeping it as synergistic as possible with your research is a good thing to do. So, I've taught TEM many a year. There have been times where I got tired of it. I taught it 10 years in a row and I'm like, I need a break, and if you've got a colleague, you're in a department where you've got multiple people who can teach that course, you can kind of trade off back and forth, and that can let you refresh a little bit. But it takes a lot of effort to do a good job teaching. It's not a trivial task. I do enjoy it. You can't let it, you honestly can't let it expand to consume what you should be doing in research when you're in a tenure track position. So, you might have a desire to spend more and more time with it, but you do have to limit it, because you have to be very cognizant about what you're being evaluated on. And so trying to get synergies, I think with every aspect of your career, always feeling like you can reach out and get help from other people. I tell new assistant professors this all the time, that you should use your colleagues, get feedback, and ask, because you tend to go in a place and you're like, oh, I have to prove myself that I'm really good and independent. But I often tell assistant professor, show me your proposals. I will get you feedback on them. It doesn't have to be perfect. We're here to help you and make you better. So having mentors, wherever you do your career is really important, and not just a mentor. You may have mentors for different things. You may have mentors for teaching who can be candid with you about how you're doing and provide you useful feedback. I think, that things have changed since when I first started, where it was much more you were judged as an individual and your ability to do everything on your own. And now the climate's much different. Mentoring and having mentoring teams is much more common, and really should be a criteria by which you judge a place, is if they're going to support you in your career.
And then you can also help grow the university or the department. If you do have that mindset, you can contribute, but then they're also contributing to you, and it kind of spans together is what it sounds like. And it's a good attitude to have. Yeah. Like that.
I'll be brief. I just want to add a little bit and just say that throughout my career, my emphasis on teaching, I became just more and more interested. I enjoyed working with the students in the teaching aspect of things more than I ever did. I came into academia really because I wanted to do research and do what I want, but I find the teaching very satisfying. It's just wonderful to connect with students. And also one of the great benefits of teaching is it really causes you to organize your thoughts and understand the subject in a way that you wouldn't unless you were going to teach the course. So it's a great educational benefit for the professor. And I wrote a couple books, and those were just because of that. It just I wanted to organize my thoughts in an area and put it down and teach it. And that can be a huge time sink. You're not going to make money on it, that's for sure. And I've had, I had senior faculty who mentored me say, don't ever waste your time, writing a book, get research and publish papers. But, I went against the grain and I got somewhat lucky. But yeah, that's that aspect of teaching is wonderful. It's just as satisfying as, new discoveries in research I have found later in my career. So.
Wonderful. Thank you for everybody for your perspectives on that. It is approaching 2:00, so I would like to just kind of ask from the people in the audience, if you do have any further questions, it is please unmute yourself and ask. We have very knowledgeable people on our panel at all points of their career, and these opportunities don't come often.
If nobody has questions,
I think Stephanie was going to ask one.
Yeah, I'm wondering what's the
yeah.
best part of your job? Like what keeps you around? What makes you excited about keep coming back?
Beth, do you want to start that, and then we'll go Jinwoo and Jim?
Honestly, I think part of it is just the diversity of things that you do as a faculty member. You never get bored, right? So I think that diversity of being able to dive deep into science, work with really smart individuals and really smart, talented students is great. I would miss the student interaction if I was at a national lab. That I would definitely miss. But I also wouldn't be as satisfied if I was purely in a teaching role. So I think that diversity is really fun, and they feed off of each other. I do agree with Jim that I like having undergrads in my group because they'll ask a question that you're like, why is it that way? You know, something that you've, taken for granted for decades, and them asking a what might seem like a naive question ends up being, quite often thought provoking. So I think the diversity, one of the things we benefit from in academia is flexibility with our time. And so if I need to pick up my kid from school, my kids just graduated from high school, so I don't need to do this anymore. But I had 2 kids before I was tenured. And I was able to leave as long as it did conflict with when I was teaching a class. I had the liberty to schedule my meetings around, what I needed to do with my children and family and stuff. And so that flexibility, I think, is fairly unique to academia and something we should all appreciate. So I think in terms of being a family-friendly career, in my opinion, it's very family-friendly because of the flexibility that you have.
That's interesting. I kind of like that outlook on it, because you hear a lot of times, like if you're a starting professor, like you don't have any time to kind of go out and have a family. Like that's not what you should be doing. But then it happens a lot, and you do have that flexibility. You still got to put in the time, but it allows you to put it in the amount you need over the period of a day, right? It's not like you have to show up 9 to 5. You could do nighttime work if you have to.
Means you'll be working till 4 and then you'll get going to the 8 o'clock class. So
yeah, exactly. But yeah, that's a nice perspective on that. Jinwoo, do you have?
Yeah, so I agree with everything Beth mentioned. So basically, you have the flexibility because you become your own boss, right? So it's like it's in some way it's very similar to running your own company, a small company, right? Because you hire people and you do your own. I mean, you develop your own idea, right? So that's the first thing, right? So that's the most important thing, right? So you have your own idea, and then you develop it into something that creates new knowledge, right? So it's your own direction, research, your own group, your own effort to raise funding and distribute the knowledge and everything. So that's the that's based on my own motivation. That kind of rolls, right? And then you keep going, right? So that's what I create. It's not somebody told me to do or something. So that I think is the best part. And I also agree with the fact that the part about the interaction with students. I like that part a lot. And I actually didn't realize before I visited a company, like it was in company in somewhere in upstate New York, like 4 years ago. So now I was an assistant professor, right? I've been in schools for the whole of my career, right? From school, postdoc, and Ohio State. Then I visited a company, and then I kind of felt about how different the environment is without the students, right? Because I'm so used to it, that's all I know, right? But then if you take out that ingredient, then you're working in a totally different research environment. And okay, so I was thinking, like would I like this environment if I were here, right? Yeah. So that kind of makes me think that, okay, this is really kind of like a valuable ingredient that I have in my working environment, fresh mind. And they refresh every like 5 years, right? So we get another, new set of, like new batch of fresh students, and then we engage them and we learn from that too, right? When we, as we advise. So that's I like about too. Yeah.
Thank you. Jim?
Yeah.
I would just agree, this environment, if it's always fresh and new, it's just a stimulating environment. It's great to have that, all those great minds thinking about stuff. It's just a wonderful place to be in that regard. Yeah. So,
Wonderful.
I would like to offer one other tidbit of advice, though, as an academic microscopy member. Again, others might comment, but we're all material scientists, but we're also electron microscopists. So, and it's easy I think, for other academic or other material scientists to just look at you as a microscopist, somebody who just runs an instrument. They don't appreciate really, what it takes and all those, and what you can really do with it. But so you get pigeonholed sometimes as a microscopist and not as the material scientist that you really are. I think that's something you have to be careful of, and particularly as a young microscopist, people are, even an old microscopist, people are always happy to give you samples and collaborate and, say, we're going to get these great publications and so forth. But you got to be really careful about that, because half of those things will never see the light of day because their student won't write up the paper, or things that are totally out of your control. So you have to be very selective about where you put your time and efforts outside your own research into other people's. You want those collaborations because they're great. It's wonderful to work with people who have great ideas and new ideas that are different than yours. But yeah, you can spend a lot of time, particularly when you're young and you don't have a lot of students to help. You can spend a lot of time yourself on the microscope getting data for others, which really may work against you. So you have to be very careful about that, about this, being able to use this great technique.
Mm-hmm. Guilty, right?
Completely agree. You will have more collaborators than you need. Yeah, completely agree. You have to be very selective, and you have to be selective about people who don't just pitch you samples and want the data back, that you're involved in the entire research program so that you understand the context and can contribute as fully as possible. So choosing collaborators is a really important skill. You have to know how they're going to involve you. And some of it's just personality, like any collaboration, but it is something you have to be careful about and not overtax yourself, because you do need to again, identify what's uniquely yours and what you're driving as the main intellectual source. And I'd say maybe we have a little bit more burden on us because you're expected to do that, but you are expected to kind of bring up the rest of the community by helping them with microscopy related things.
All right. Thank you, everybody. So it is past 2 o'clock. So I do kind of want to wrap this up just to be respectful of everybody's time. Thank you, all 3 panelists. I always learn lots from you, and this was very insightful. And so I thank you for kind of giving us your time for an hour to give us your thoughts on kind of the different aspects of an academic position that most people might not consider or have the opportunity to ask questions about. So this is the first of a 3-part mini-series that MSA Student Council is hosting. Next Tuesday, we will have another one at, what time is it? I think it is at 12 o'clock on, I think it's Tuesday. So I invite everybody to keep an eye out for the sign up for that, as well as our social media in order to get more information. And then we, at some point, we'll have one for industry context as well. So that's kind of the 3 aspects of career paths that people can join. In addition, I want to give a shout out to the pre-meeting Congress that happens at M&M every year. So the Student Council, we operate throughout the year kind of as a subgroup in MSA, working on all different types of activities, but we hold a one-day conference at M&M every year. It is a great opportunity to connect with leading experts in academia and industry and get a good perspective from them, as well as it is a one-day kind of mini conference. There are lots of talks that go on, lots of social events associated around the day. So you get to learn, and it's a great experience. Speaking, I've been involved with it for 4 years now, and it's, as a participant and an organizer, it's very worth your time attending. So again, thank you to all three panelists, and I hope to see everybody in the future and very soon.
Alrighty, thank you.
Thank
It's been a
That was
pleasure.
very fun. Thank you very much.
Thanks for organizing.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for volunteering and agreeing to be on the panel.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thanks, Eric.
Wonderful.